Welcome to Functional Philosophy, the show in which I, Charles II, explain and apply Ayn Rand's philosophy, objectivism. If you'd like to ask me a question on objectivism or its application, just go to charles2.com/contact. And my last name is spelled T as in tango, E as in echo, and W as in whiskey. Recently, listening to Ben Shapiro and Sam Harris have their debate, Ben brings up Aristotle's immovable mover, and it reminded me that he mentions it in a few other places as well, and it almost seems like he might actually think he is Aristotelian as opposed to Platonic. So I went looking, but couldn't really find anything much on it from Ayn Rand aside from a brief mention in the Journals of Ayn Rand where she quite rightly dismisses it. But my question to you is, do you know of anything else, / more in-depth, that Rand said on the subject, and did Leonard Peikoff ever bring it up? Also, what are your thoughts on the subject? Well, I don't know of anything else Rand said on the subject. I do remember Peikoff bringing it up in one of his radio shows as a secondary manifestation of the idea that God is required to explain the universe, but he dismissed it in a brief way, the same way Ayn Rand did in her journals. So that's all I know of off the top of my head in terms of commentary on this issue by objectivists. The unmoved mover is, of course, a mistake. It is a false idea. It is a bit of Platonism in Aristotle, but you can see where the idea comes from, and I don't blame Aristotle for having this idea. Here is briefly Aristotle's reasoning for this idea, and in the course of explaining this, I will explain what the idea itself is. Aristotle's idea was, there is such a thing as causality, action, change, all of which reduce to motion. But motion of any given thing requires the motion of some other thing. You can't have motion of one thing without its being moved by something else. Think of shopping carts at the supermarket. You know how shopping carts, you push into another shopping cart. One shopping cart goes into the other, and you have the people who work there pushing the giant lines of shopping carts. Well, think of these shopping carts, right? Now, each moving shopping cart in this line, it's not moving by itself. It is being pushed by the shopping cart behind it. It couldn't just be moving without being pushed by some other physical thing. So each moving thing itself requires a mover, but each mover is itself moved. So you have a moved mover. All of these carts are moved movers. Everything is a moved mover, right? It is moved by what is behind it, and in turn moves what is in front of it. But, Aristotle thinks, what about the beginning of this process? What about when we get to the end? So, Aristotle here confronts a serious problem. And this is why I don't blame him, because he at least recognized two things that couldn't be true, and he tried to come up with an answer, but his answer wasn't correct. The first thing he recognized was that this cannot be infinite, right? What does infinite mean? It means a quantity so large that it has no identity. Well, everything is what it is. There is no such thing as a quantity that has no identity, as a non-specific quantity. There is no such thing as an actual infinity. Everything that is what it is. However many shopping carts there are in a line, there are that many shopping carts and only that many. There can't be infinite because infinite means no specific number. It just goes on infinitely. There can't be any such thing as infinite because infinity violates the law of identity. So he says, okay, there can't be an infinite series of things pushing other things. There can't be an infinite series of moved movers. There can't be an infinite number of shopping carts. There has to be some specific number of shopping carts. However many shopping carts there are, no matter how large that number is, whatever number it is, however many shopping carts there are that many and no more. So it can't be infinite, no matter how large it is. But then, he says, on the other hand, if there are a finite number of shopping carts, to use my analogy, the first shopping cart can't be moved by nothing, but there's nothing behind it. So how did this get started? He actually quotes Parmenides and says nothing comes from nothing, which is true. So he says there are a finite number of shopping carts. So there's a first shopping cart. But if there's a first shopping cart or a first motion of that shopping cart, how did the first shopping cart get moved? Because everything that moves is moved by something else. So how do you start this whole process? And so he comes up with the idea of the unmoved mover. This is a thing that can move things without itself being moved, which Aristotle requires, given his premises, in order to explain a finite universe that doesn't come from nothing, or a finite chain of cause and effect that is not initiated by nothing. So he says it can't be infinite, but it also can't be nothing. So there must be some kind of thing that starts the process that can move things, because we need this process to get started, but it can't itself be moved, because if it needed to be moved, we'd have to say it was moved by something else, in which case we would just be back to the problem of infinity again, or we would say it was moved by nothing, in which case we have the problem of something coming from nothing. So there must be some kind of thing, an unmoved mover. So again, you can see this is not an easy question. It's not obvious. It's not like Aristotle was being dishonest here. Even recognizing what's wrong with infinity and nothing puts him ahead of almost everybody else even today. The unmoved mover is a sophisticated answer to a serious conundrum. But it is nevertheless false. No, the chain of causality cannot be infinite, and no, something cannot come from nothing, but what you have to understand is that there is no such thing as nothing. There was no nothing. You can think of it like the universe starts in medias res. Like in fiction, when you start in the middle of a story, you can think of the universe like that. Now, this is just an analogy. Maybe this will be more confusing to some people than it is clarifying, but what I mean is the universe starts already going. You don't have to explain how the universe started. There is no necessity of explaining how the first shopping cart started to move and push the other shopping carts. That's just where the universe began. The idea that you need an answer is itself the mistake. Positing the question is the mistake here. You don't need an answer. The universe simply exists. There is simply motion, and motion goes back to whatever the first state of the universe was. There must be some first state of the universe, and that's it. But you don't have to explain it. It doesn't have to have come from anywhere. It can't have come from anywhere. There's nowhere from which it could have come. The chain of causality simply goes back only so far, and that's that. The idea that you need to explain where something came from is a contradiction on its face. The attempt to answer it is itself a contradiction. You don't need an explanation for this question. This is not a legitimate question. There was no nothing. There is the universe. There are the things that exist, and there are the actions they have taken. Now, yes, it's true. The universe is a plenum. Every motion of every physical thing involves motion of something else. And you keep going back until you get to the first state of the universe, whatever that was, when things started. Now to ask, well, how did things start? There's no how did things start. That's just the first state of the universe. And the universe is what it is, and you don't need any explanation. Anyway, it's no surprise that religious people like Ben Shapiro bring this up, because many people do have trouble with this. This is one of the most convincing arguments religious people make. And Aristotle does give a sophisticated answer to this problem, which involves something that can be interpreted as God. That is what the unmoved mover is supposed to be. So Ben Shapiro is not being dishonest here. Aristotle's argument is completely in line with religion and provides religion some legitimacy. It points to an area of the natural world that is supposedly inherently contradictory, and therefore requires a contradiction or a contradictory being to explain, a being that can move but is not itself moved, and, of course, that is what God is. He is that being that can violate identity and do impossible things. And so if you can show that nature, the natural world, is itself based on an inherent contradiction, well, that just goes straight to God. Which is why this answer is so disastrous. It has provided religious people cover for a long time. But the truth is, the universe is a self-sufficient primary. It needs no explanation. And it simply is what it is. And any attempt to explain existence by reference to either super or sub-existence, which means either God or nothing, is a mistake. Next question. I would love to know your opinion on the literally concept, death of the author. Obviously, he means literary. I did not correct this because this whole question is littered with misspellings and poor grammar such that I know that was not a one-off typo. If you do not know, Death of the Author states that the intentions of an author/creator do not matter when reading a book or any art, and whatever interpretation an observer sees in a piece of art is just as valid as anybody else's. In other words, it says you should separate the creator from their creation. I do not like this theory of literature/art at all, but I would like to know what you think. Well, I don't know the entire context of the source of this idea, or at least this idea as coined in this phrase, death of the author, so there could be some illegitimate ideas there. I think this comes from an essay that I haven't read, so I can't endorse the essay without having read it, but as I understand it, this is a totally legitimate concept. Art, once created, is objective. The author's intentions no longer matter, nor do the interpretations of any reader. This whole issue is an obvious manifestation of intrinsicism versus subjectivism. And the idea is either a work is intrinsically what it is according to the intentions or consciousness of the author, which transcend any objective interpretation, or it is what anybody subjectively interprets it as, and everything is equally legitimate. All interpretations are equally legitimate. Well, those are both wrong, because they are both forms of primacy of consciousness. A work of art can be objectively interpreted in a certain context, regardless of the author's intentions. Imagine this. Imagine a space pod crashed on Earth containing Atlas Shrugged. Well, would Atlas Shrugged be any less legitimate because it wasn't written by anybody we knew and we didn't know the intentions of the author? Imagine some computer randomly created it, or some monkey randomly typed it. Would that make it any less valuable? No. Because in our context, we know what the English language means. We would be able to read that book, and it doesn't matter whether there was any intention behind it. I mean, it matters in the sense that since you know somebody wrote it, in today's context, you know Ayn Rand existed, that can give you some extra appreciation. But in terms of the art itself, it would be just as valuable. It would still mean the same thing. Now, that does require the context of the English language. Without that, it would just be a bunch of scribbles. But once you have the context of a language, it doesn't matter what produces any combination of words in that language. You can still know what those words mean, and they can still fit together in a way that is artistic or not. I mean, you can program a computer with an algorithm and tell it to come up with technically grammatically correct sentences. So I can hit randomize on my computer and it says, the sky is blue. Now, no conscious being crafted that specific sentence, but I still know what that sentence means. I still know what it refers to. So yes, I agree with death of the author. The author's intentions don't matter once the artwork is out there. Suppose Ayn Rand said, well, I really intended Atlas Shrugged to be a parody, and it's supposed to show how ridiculous capitalism is, and Galt is this lunatic, and Galt's Gulch is this fantastical place that I intended to be so absurd that nobody could think it would ever exist. I mean, would that matter? No. Now, you need a context for interpretation. You need a language and a culture, perhaps, but once you have that, it doesn't matter where the combination of words came from. You have the key for interpreting it. I talked about this a little bit in my discussion with Ken Levine, where he said he was a limited believer in authorial intent, meaning to say that his intentions in making BioShock didn't matter that much. And I said, yeah, I agree. What you think BioShock is doesn't matter. What matters is what it actually is objectively. So the alternative to authorial intent is not, well, anything anybody says an artwork represents is equally valid. No. You interpret an artwork in a certain context, namely the context of the language that artwork is being expressed in terms of. I'm speaking mainly of novels here because that's the easiest thing to talk about. It's conceptually explicit, it's verbal, as opposed to painting or sculpture or other forms of art. But within that context, it is objective and it means what it means, and any objective person who is not making a mistake will come to the same conclusion. The intentions of the creator and the subjectivity of the reader, assuming the latter, are not necessary components for interpreting a piece of art. Next question. I have noticed that a lot of people ignore inconsistencies in their beliefs, politically, religiously, etc. I doubt they don't see their contradictions since they are so damn obvious. Stephen Crowder, for example, says that one is going to be a hypocrite if they have an opinion on anything. If I notice a contradiction in anything, I dig to see where it went wrong, which would by today's standards be autistic, in quotes. My question is, why is it that these people don't care to acknowledge and fix inconsistencies in their beliefs, like religious people who believe in contradictory things but just don't think about and question it? Well, this question boils down to why do some people tolerate inconsistency while other people don't? And really what you're asking is, why are some people immoral? Because toleration of inconsistency is just a form of evasion, and evasion is the action that constitutes immorality. Well, the fundamental answer here is that people choose to tolerate inconsistency. There is nothing deeper than that. If you want a deeper answer than that, then what you are accepting is a deterministic premise. But determinism is false. There is nothing that mandates that somebody is going to tolerate inconsistency or that he will choose not to. It's simply a choice, a free will choice. Some people say, I know inconsistency is wrong. I know that's against reality. I want to fix that. Other people say, I don't want to fix that. I'm going to go with my emotions. Why do people choose one over the other? Because they chose to. There is no answer deeper than that. Some people simply choose to be immoral. Now, why would anybody choose to be immoral? Because it is pleasant, in a sense, in the short term. Why do people break their diets? Why do people eat something that tastes good even though they know it's going to make them unhappy in the long run? Well, because it tastes good right now. Why do people sometimes go with the short run over the long run? There is no why, except that they chose to. If you could explain it in a deterministic way, then there would be no such thing as immorality. There would be no such thing as free will. This is simply an irreducible choice. But the reason that choice is even possible is because people have the ability to focus. And the ability to focus is really the essence of what it is to be a human being. It is what makes us capable of being so much more than animals, and also what makes us capable of being worse than any animal. The ability to focus allows us to see far into the distance beyond what is right in front of our eyes, but it also allows us to stare at the ground in front of us rather than looking at what is right in front of us or far in the distance. That is the nature of having the faculty of rationality. It makes you capable of great things, of a life better than any animal can live, of happiness and joys and pleasures greater than any animal can experience. But it also makes you capable of greater misery than any animal can experience. Reason is bound up with free will, and therefore responsibility. If you use reason, if you are rational, you will see farther and live better than any animal. If you abdicate that responsibility, you will fail to see what even an animal can, and you will be more miserable than any animal. Being a human being means high reward if you do things right, and high punishment if you do things wrong. Now, there is a psychological aspect to this. False philosophies make people capable of tolerating inconsistency to a degree that would be more difficult to accept without the obfuscations involved in false philosophies. This is the whole way bad philosophies have their influence. They make people psychologically capable of evasion. If you see something right in front of you, it's pretty hard to evade. There's a reason most people don't make up excuses when an oncoming train is speeding towards them. You see very few people who come up with any kind of argument that, oh, the train is just an illusion, I don't really see it, I don't need to move out of the way. Most people move out of the way because it's a directly perceptual thing. So what evil philosophies do is they add in so much obfuscation, so many confusing steps, that they make it possible for people to see things less clearly, and therefore to not jump out of the way of the oncoming train because they don't see it so clearly. And so false philosophies make it easier for people to accept inconsistencies. You remember Ayn Rand quotes Ralph Waldo Emerson as saying that consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds. If somebody provides you with a tortuous philosophical argument purporting to show that inconsistency is legitimate, then you will be more capable of accepting inconsistency. What is wrong with inconsistency? Well, inconsistency is wrong because of the law of identity. Inconsistency is an epistemological question, and one's view on it results from his view of metaphysics. If you believe in the law of identity, then you will not tolerate inconsistency, because you will know that Any inconsistency in your ideas means that you have made a mistake because existence is not inconsistent. But if you believe that existence is by its nature contradictory and inconsistent, then having inconsistencies in your ideas will be no problem to you. That will in fact be evidence that you are faithfully adhering to reality. You see this all the time. People talk about quantum physics in this way all the time. This goes back to the Heraclitean flux. People almost explicitly make this argument all the time. Look, reality is itself contradictory. Therefore, if you're going to be ideological, if you're going to be rigid, you are not adhering to reality. Because reality isn't consistent like your rigid ideology. What's true for me isn't true for you. What's true today isn't true tomorrow. We live in this Heraclitean flux. Just look at quantum physics. A thing can be in two places at once. Schrodinger's cat, all of this. Reality isn't consistent. And so if your ideas are, you are being a rigid ideologue. Now, I still believe that somewhere deep inside, anybody who accepts these ideas as being dishonest on some level, I'm not saying that's in their conscious awareness at all times, but I do not believe it is possible to honestly hold that existence is contradictory. But having all of these obfuscations does make it psychologically possible for people to evade in ways they otherwise wouldn't. So why do some people accept inconsistencies and other people don't? Well, some people are dishonest and other people are scrupulously honest. I do not believe that toleration of inconsistency is fundamentally a problem of confusion. It is fundamentally a problem of dishonesty. Now, how to resolve an inconsistency may be an honest confusion, but accepting inconsistency is not a question of confusion. That is a question of honesty and morality. If you'd like to keep up with everything I do, just go to charles2.com. If you'd like to enable me to do more, just go to patreon.com/charles2 and become a supporter. Thanks for listening.